Number 1. When I was younger, there was a ruined building at the bottom of our street. All of the kids in the area kept well away from it because the rumor was that it was haunted. The concrete walls of the old two-story building were cracked and crumbling. The windows were broken, and shards of glass lay all over the floor inside. One evening, as a test of courage, my best friend and I decided to explore the creepy old place. We climbed in through a window at the back of the building. The whole place was dirty, and there was a layer of mud on the wooden floor. As we dusted ourselves off, we looked up and were shocked to see that someone had written the words, "I am dead," on the wall near the ceiling. "Probably just some teenagers trying to scare kids," I said. "Yeah, probably," replied my friend nervously. We explored more of the rooms on the ground floor. In a room that appeared to have once been a kitchen of sorts, we found some more writing on the wall. It read, "I am in a room upstairs." We walked up the creaking stairs to the second floor. I led the way and my friend followed close behind. I wasn't scared, but he was beginning to get a little jittery. When we came to the top of the stairs, we turned left and walked cautiously down a narrow hallway. At the end of the hallway was a closed door with some more ominous writing on it. "You will find me in this room." By now, my friend was shaking with fear. I was quite creeped out too, but I didn't want to show it. He told me he didn't want to go any further, but I insisted, telling him there was nothing to be afraid of. I turned the handle, and the door creaked open. We stepped into the room and found it empty. There were two closed doors on either side. There was more creepy writing on the wall. It read, "My head is on the left and my body is on the right." As soon as my friend saw this, he completely lost his nerve. He gave a yelp and turned to run away. I caught hold of his arm, but he shook me off and fled out through the open door. I heard his footsteps disappearing off down the hallway. I held my ground. I was determined to be brave and overcome my fear. Mustering all my courage, I opened the door on the right and walked inside. I walked to the other side of the room, and on the wall, written in tiny letters, were the words, "My body is underneath." I looked down at the floor. I was standing on some more writing on the floorboards. I stepped back and saw the words, "My head is coming from the room behind you, turn around." I heard the door behind me creaking and quickly turned. There was a shadow moving behind the door. Suddenly something rolled into the room and came to a rest against the wall. It was my friend's severed head. His dead, sightless eyes seemed to stare at me. Screaming in horror, I flung myself out through the open window and fell 2 stories to the ground. I landed on my side, breaking my arm. In horrible pain, I ran home, crying and yelling for my parents. The police were called and they searched the old ruined building. At first, they didn't find anything. There wasn't even any writing on the wall. They combed the house from top to bottom, but they didn't find any traces of my friend. Then they pried up the floorboards. His body was lying underneath. They never found his head. Number 2. I had a best friend. His name was Billy. We went to school together and hung out all the time. Then one day, Billy stopped coming to school. I didn't see him for weeks. There were rumors that he had suffered a nervous breakdown. One evening when my parents were out, there was a knock on the door. When I answered it, Billy was standing there. He was acting very strangely. His eyes were tired and bloodshot, and he looked like he was very nervous. He kept looking around and glancing over his shoulder. "I need to talk to you," he said. I invited him inside and closed the door. He sat down on the couch, but he couldn't relax. Something was really bothering him. He was twitching and his leg was shaking. "Are you okay?" I asked. "My parents think I'm crazy," he said. "Everyone thinks I'm crazy. Even I thought I was crazy for a while." "And are you crazy?" I asked. Billy let out a humorless chuckle. "Look out the window," he said. "Oh, why?" Just look, do me a favor. Look out the window and tell me what you see. I decided to humor him, so I opened the curtains and peered out. What do you see? He asked. I see some houses, some cars, some streetlights. Exactly, he said. And do you notice anything strange? No, I said. You see those streetlights? He asked. They're supposed to be on, but they're not. They're all off. How could every light on the street be off? Who do you think did that? I don't know, I said. Who? Billy lowered his voice and whispered, The Thin Man. What are you talking about? I asked in astonishment. I heard rumors about him before, Billy said, but I thought it was just an urban legend. It's not. The Thin Man is real. He hates the streetlights. He looks just like a normal man at first, but when he unfolds himself, he's really tall and really thin, just like a streetlight, and he's dressed all in gray, just like a streetlight. He hides behind them. When it starts to get dark outside and the streetlights aren't on, you wouldn't even know that he was there. How do you know all this? I asked. Because I've seen him, Billy replied. When? A few weeks ago, I was kicking a football around in the park, and I accidentally kicked it into the bushes. I went in to get it, and that's when I saw him. He seemed just like an ordinary man standing in the street. He was looking up and down the block, and then, when he thought that nobody was watching, he just sort of unfolded himself. He turned into something tall and thin, and he hid behind the streetlight. All of a sudden I heard a click and the light went out. Then he just sort of slid to the next streetlight and I heard another click, and that one went out too. He did it all down the block, click and slide, until all the lights were out. That's when he noticed me. All of a sudden our eyes met, and I knew that he had seen me and he knew that I had seen him. I just started running and I didn't look back. When I got home, I locked all the doors. For a long time after that, I was afraid to leave the house. Then I realized that it was only dangerous at night. It's usually safe during the day. He only comes out at night. He hates being seen. Nobody believes me. My parents took me to a psychiatrist, and she didn't believe me either. Do you believe me? Sure, Billy, I said, trying to humor him. I believe you. No you don't, he said, disappointed. Anyway, even if you don't believe me, I thought I'd better warn you. After all, you are my best friend. And with that, Billy got up and said goodbye. At the front door, he looked all around and made sure that it was safe and then just took off running. I watched him until he was out of sight. Then I went back inside. I felt really sad. I felt like my best friend had lost his mind. That was until the next morning when the police found Billy. He had been folded. There was no blood and guts, but every bone in his body had been broken. He had been folded up into a tiny little bundle. The police didn't even know what they'd found at first until they picked it up and saw his flattened face. His mother had to go down to the police station and identify him. When they brought her into the room to show her his remains, she fainted. He was just a tiny bundle of flesh and bone and clothes and hair. He had been just folded. Ever since I heard the news, I've been on edge. I can't stop thinking about the crazy things Billy told me. Suddenly, they don't seem so crazy. I haven't been able to sleep. I'm tired and my eyes are bloodshot. I'm nervous all the time and I always find myself looking over my shoulder. This morning when I left for school, I counted the street lamps on my road. When I came home this evening, I counted them again. There was one too many. Number 3. Samantha had two best friends named Jenny and Ember. Her father was taking her on a weekend vacation and she invited them to come along. Her family owned a cabin in the woods, and on Friday evening, her father drove the girls up there. "See that lake?" asked Samantha when they arrived. "That's Lake Samantha. My dad grew up here. He loved it so much he named me after it." That night, after they had unpacked their things, the three girls sat around and thought of ways to amuse themselves. "Does anyone have any spooky stories?" asked Amber. "I know one," Samantha said. "About 10 minutes hike from here, there's an old broken down house. We passed it on the way up here. It's out in the middle of nowhere, tucked away off a narrow little side road. A long time ago, a man lived there. His family were really wealthy, and they owned hundreds of acres of land around here. This man met a simple country girl from a simple country town, and they fell in love. His family wasn't too happy about it. They didn't think the girl was good enough for him, but he ignored them. He was an independent type of guy, and he went off to build a little house on a chunk of their land out of the middle of nowhere. He married this girl, and everything was wonderful. They had a daughter, and eventually they had a son. This is where the story starts to go bad. Their son was sick, not physically but mentally. He was sick in the head. He wasn't mentally disabled or anything, he was just a little off. By the time he was 9 years old, he became too much for his parents to handle, throwing temper tantrums, erratic sleep patterns, disappearing into the woods and hiding, that kind of thing. Not knowing what to do about his son, the man turned to his family for help. His parents had the boy taken away. They sent him to a place deep in the woods. It wasn't an insane asylum, but it did cater to people with special needs, if you know what I mean. His parents thought it was for the best. Over time, the family got used to not having him around. They gradually stopped visiting him. They functioned as if they never even had a son, and everything went back to being wonderful again. 8 years later, the boy, who was about 16 or 17 at this time, managed to escape from the hospital. The staff did a search, but he was nowhere to be found. His family was notified, and they were devastated. They were worried for his safety. He had been alone in the wilderness for weeks, and he was probably dead. But the boy wasn't dead. One night, he found his way back home. He crept into his house, and one by one he slaughtered his entire family. His father, his mother, sister, all of them chopped to pieces. With the blood still dripping from his axe, he disappeared into the woods. When the grisly remains of his family were discovered a few days later, the townsfolk in the surrounding area were horrified. The police tried to find the boy, but it was no use. To this day, he has never been found. Since then, every year around harvest time, people have started to go missing, and in their place, a corn-husk doll would be left behind. Legend has it the boy still roams the woods around these parts. The surrounding towns have bought into the legend, and they hang dolls by their front door for protection. They say if the boy sees a doll hanging from the door of a house, he will pass that house by and leave the residents in peace. Nobody knows if it's true or not, but there's a doll hanging from the door of every house in town. "That's so creepy," cried Jenny. "Do you have a doll on your door?" "Of course," said Samantha. "My dad says he doesn't believe the legend, but we hung one just in case." Apparently, the house is still haunted by the ghosts of his murdered family, and if you go up there late at night, you can hear the whole thing take place all over again. "Do you think we could go up there?" Jenny asked. "Sure," said Samantha, "but tomorrow, during daylight, there is no sense in tempting fate." That night, the girls slept in the same room and huddled together, trying to pretend they weren't frightened by the story and expecting to hear something tapping at the window at any moment. The next morning, Samantha's father made them all a big breakfast, and they went down to the lake for a swim. Around noon, they decided to make the trip up to the old haunted house. When they got there, the girls sensed an eerie presence in the old dilapidated place. It was enough to make their skin crawl. They explored the ruins of the old house, peeking into corners and sifting through the rubble. After a while, Samantha spotted something half buried in the dirt. It was some sort of a book. She dug it out and dusted it off. The girls gathered around as she opened it and began to flip through the yellowed pages. "It's like a diary or something," said Samantha. "Maybe it's his diary," Jenny whispered. "Whose diary?" asked Amber. "The guy," said Jenny. "The guy that killed his family." Samantha read the diary aloud as the others listened. "There's a dedication inscribed inside the cover," she said. "It reads, 'To my family who I love and cherish and who will always be with me. September the 5th, 1987. It has been hard alone. All they had to do was talk to me. They could not talk to me. I hear their voices late at night sometimes. I hear their screams. It is cold and dark. I needed love. They did not love me. The medicines are gone now. I am free, free from all of them. If they could not love me, they had to go. Dark sleep for everyone. I hear their voices still, always screaming.' December the 4th, 1987. They have stopped looking for me. It is okay for me now. I live in the forest. I chase down animals and put them in dark sleep, just like Mom and Dad and Sis. I visit my old house at night. I listen to the voices. At least they talk to me now." October the 3rd, 1995. I left the forest years ago and moved to a small town nearby. Nobody recognizes me. No one knows who I am. I hear people telling my story sometimes. It makes me laugh inside. They all fear me. I still come to the forest sometimes. I spend the nights in my old house. Mom and Dad still talk to me. They say they are very proud of me. November the 2nd, 1998. Life has been good. I found a job. I bought a house. I met a girl. She is very quiet and pretty. Sometimes I bring her to the forest. She likes it. I let Mom and Dad see her. They like her. July the 1st, 2000. Today is a great day. I have a baby now. I am so happy. Mom and Dad are grandparents now. My wife isn't doing so well though. It was hard for her. She might not make it. Maybe she will go in dark sleep. I am happy now. August the 13th, 2010. I am so proud of my child. She is just like me, except she is much smarter. She has no problems. She doesn't hear the voices. She goes to school and has lots of friends, not like me. Sometimes I take her to the woods. I love her so much. I named her after the lake, Samantha. For a few moments after Samantha stopped reading, there was a stunned silence. "What the heck?" cried Jenny. "Samantha, is this some sort of a joke?" Amber asked nervously. "It isn't funny." "This can be true," Samantha whispered. "It couldn't possibly be." Just then they heard a sound of twigs snapping behind them. When they turned around, they saw Samantha's father standing there. There was a strange, pained look on his face, and he was holding an axe in his hands. "You weren't supposed to find that," he muttered. "There's no other way now. Dark sleep for everyone." "No, Dad," Samantha screamed. "No, no, no, no." When Samantha's father had finished chopping up the bodies, he put the pieces in large plastic bags and buried them deep in the woods, so deep that no one would ever find them. Now they could be together forever. "I'll watch over you now," he mumbled as he patted down the earth with his shovel. "You may not understand now, but you will in time. This is the only way for us to be together. Dark sleep forever. We all stay together."